One fateful night, just 2 days before the Constitution was signed, 55 guests, including many of the Founding Fathers, were found slamming down 171 bottles of liquor at the City Tavern in Philadelphia. In fact, due to unsanitary drinking water, the people of Philadelphia relied mostly on alcoholic beverages for hydration. This copious alcohol consumption inhibited people's ability to lead careers and family lives, so it was only a matter of time before Americans took issue with drinking. Alcohol abuse isn't native to the United States. Colonists were fond of alcohol when they first came to America, and often drank wine in the morning. Alcohol was seen as physiologically healthy and was socially encouraged, and people consumed between 2 and 4 times more liquor than they do today. Alcohol consumption was at its worst shortly after the creation of the United States from 1790 to 1830. In fact, from 1792 to 1810, the number of distilleries in the U.S. increased by 500%. It wasn't long into the 19th century before the backlash started. People supporting Prohibition were known as dries, and people against Prohibition were known as wets. People were publicly shamed for drinking alcohol, sometimes being forced to wear the letter D, standing for drunkard. The Women's Christian Temperance Union, otherwise known as the WCTU, was formed in 1874 to protect families from alcoholism. The WCTU formed the Prohibition Party that participated in major elections. Prohibitionists were gaining ground, with the Prohibition Party receiving over 270,000 votes in the 1892 presidential election. Also, alcohol restrictions were placed in many states and counties in the 1880s, including South Carolina, where alcohol production was completely banned. The Prohibition Party partnered with the Anti-Saloon League, or ASL, which was founded in 1893. The ASL made very effective propaganda, such as the poster on screen, that prompted 17 states to vote for Prohibition on their own accord by 1917. Wayne Wheeler was the leader of the ASL and used pressure politics to unseat politicians, using grassroots campaigns to convert voters from wets to dries. This forced politicians to either support Prohibition or lose their jobs. Adding insult to injury, World War I created anti-German sentiment in the 1910s. Many American brewers were German, and alcohol became synonymous with the enemy. Soon, prohibitory legislation arrived on the national stage. The ASL introduced the 18th Amendment to Congress in 1917. The bill passed easily, receiving 282 out of 430 votes in the House of Representatives and 47 out of 55 votes in the Senate. The bill would have passed even if President Hoover vetoed it. The states ratified the 18th Amendment in 1919, and it went into effect nationwide on January 17, 1920, marking the start of Prohibition. Wayne Wheeler himself wrote the Volstead Act to enforce the 18th Amendment. The act outlawed any beverage containing over 0.5% alcohol, including beer. This was a shock to Americans, as the public believed that only hard liquor and whiskey were to be prohibited. Alcohol taxes constituted nearly 40% of government revenue, so the ASL introduced new supplementary taxes. With this sacrifice, the dries could only hope that Prohibition would work. Initially, Prohibition was successful. Worker productivity increased and violent crime decreased. However, many Americans intended to continue drinking. Prohibition gave alcohol a newfound forbidden fruit appeal, encouraging many Americans to try the substance for the first time. Americans found many ways to circumvent the law. For example, the sale and manufacture of alcohol was illegal, but consumption wasn't. People were allowed to keep previously acquired alcohol. Bars and clubs hoarded alcoholic beverages, and whiskey was permitted for medicinal purposes. Many suddenly became rabbis and priests for access to religious wine, and religious and medical activity skyrocketed. Some stores, for instance, sold Vine Glow, or bricks of dehydrated grape juice that was not alcoholic itself but could be soaked in a cupboard for a month and be turned into wine. Many illegally made moonshine using illegal stills, including politicians who voted for Prohibition. Urban dwellers crowded in speakeasies, not-so-secret pubs that often looked like ordinary shops or homes. Speakeasies were filled with jazz, flappers, and lots of bribes. On a positive note, different genders and races mingled at an unprecedented level.
Prohibition was definitely failing, but why? Primarily, the dries underestimated Americans' knack for acquiring alcohol. For instance, rum runners smuggled alcohol into country by sea. Rum Row, as it was called, sold Americans alcohol just beyond the country's east coastline. It wasn't just the people, though. The federal government was undeniably responsible, at least in part. The conservative 1920s government limited spending so it couldn't actually enforce prohibition. The newly formed Bureau of Prohibition had only 1,500 agents to cover America's 110 million people. Government officials became corrupt and bootleggers paid off cops. Some unfortunate people received life in prison for alcohol possession, while others got off scot-free. In fact, officers were blatantly not enforcing the law, and even the Anti-Saloon League was involved in scandals involving shady transactions. Prohibition simply cost the government money, time, and resources, so people started getting off with light fines to free up the judicial system. Alcohol production may have actually increased. However, this was just the beginning of the chaos. Something bigger, more violent, and more organized emerged. Alcohol became rare and valuable when it was outlawed, which led to the rise of gangs and crime, particularly mobsters and gangsters. Gangs raided alcohol sources and fought each other to establish control over their respective cities' market. Chicago was particularly infamous. Al Capone, perhaps the most famous mobster of all time, became the leader of the Italian mafia on the city's south side. The agreement between Al Capone's South Side Gang and Bugs Moran's North Side Gang, who was another influential gang leader, to stay in their respective areas collapsed. Capone, unlike other gangsters, paraded the streets of Chicago. He was friendly in public appearances but brutal at work.
Yeah, boy.
He often bribed officials and sometimes got away with crimes in broad daylight. George Remus, a rich and famous bootlegger, wasn't part of the mob but had a quite clever scheme. He set up a drug company to legally buy previous stored liquor. He then set up a transport company and men to intercept the transported liquor so he could sell it back to the government. Unfortunately for mobsters and bootleggers, prohibition was on its way out. The St. Valentine's Day Massacre of 1929 happened when gangsters, presumably working for Al Capone, invited Irish mobsters to a garage to purchase whiskey. Their operation was a sting. Men dressed as police walked into the room, lined the Irish mobsters against the wall, and shot them all to death. Americans were shocked at atrocities like this one and many others and were already tired of the city's violence, so this was the straw that broke the camel's back. Additionally, Polly and Sabin, who often donated to the Republican Party, created the Women's Organization for National Prohibition Reform, which had over 1.5 million members. It endorsed Franklin D. Roosevelt in the 1932 presidential election against Hoover. Selling alcohol again would have benefited the economy, and prohibition clashed with American values of liberty and freedom. But President Hoover did nothing about prohibition and lost to FDR in 1932. Roosevelt took office on March 4th, 1933, and later that year passed the 21st Amendment to end prohibition. The amendment went into effect on December 5th, 1933, officially ending prohibition. While many think that prohibition exerted a temporary influence on the United States due to its nullification, the alcohol ban set the precedent for many modern laws, such as the 1984 Minimum Drinking Age Act. Additionally, many states were slow to end prohibition. Oklahoma didn't go wet until 1959, and many countries still outlaw alcohol today. In fact, Murdoch University found that prohibition decreased liver cirrhosis rates until the 1960s. Today is more socially acceptable for young women and young people to drink alcohol, and gangsters never fizzled out after prohibition. They are now profiting from lucrative drug markets. We now see that banning commodities create black markets. Speaking of which, prohibition gives the governments a starting point on how to handle other drugs, influencing marijuana policies and rigging wars on drugs. However, most importantly, prohibition encourages Americans to think critically about the benefits and drawbacks of alcohol and other substance usages. That's the entire history of prohibition. Thanks for watching.